right, so Tuesday's the big day, right? You've got a fun-filled weekend planned?
Yeah.
Full of vibes to 11. We're going to do a bunch of different things today. I thought I would go back and review capillary exchange with you in Chapter 19. So that we don't get behind, I wanted to just briefly go through Chapter 20 with you. I'm not going to cover all the material, at least a little bit for that Chapter 3 to read at home. And then if we have some time, I'd like to get you into respiratory anatomy. So we're just going to do a mishmash of things today, but my main job is to make sure you feel comfortable with that fluid exchange of the capillaries. So that's what I wanted to start you off with. I had asked you to look at page 63 as well, so we'll go over the answers to the top of page 63. Just a reminder, if you happen to still have your IP-10 CD that came with your textbook, there is a nice capillary exchange demonstration on there, so that's one place to get some help. Okay, and for Tuesday, our exam is chapters 18 and 19. There are about 59 or 60 multiple choice questions. Okay, one of the essays is going to be tracing blood flow through the heart, both pulmonary and systemic flow. So start with the right atrium, take me back and forth from the lungs back to the heart, take me out through systemic flow with arteries all the way back through the veins, then dump us back in the right atrium of the heart. That one's on there, it's guaranteed, it's a 4-point question, so just make sure you plan for that one. There's 104.5 points built into this test, so you've actually got a little cushion in there, so by doing that blood flow, that at least gives you a guaranteed 4 points for those essays. What kinds of questions do you have for Tuesday's test? Three, right?
Are there any pictures on it?
Oh, I don't think so. I don't recall putting it on there at all. I'm pretty sure there's not, yeah. Have you had a chance to start studying? Okay. Nervously, yeah, okay. Just some thoughts for today. I just was thinking about some items that we talked about over the past few class periods. So one of the thoughts for today is the first question there. Why do you think people should sleep in cold rooms, not warm rooms?
Feels better.
Feels better, that's one thing. Prevent a drop in blood pressure. Do you know what we call it when you're laying down and all of a sudden you stand and the blood pressure drops? Good. Orthostatic hypotension. If you're laying in a warm room, what does heat do to blood vessels? Vasodilate. Good. So if you're sleeping in an 80-degree room and then you stand up, even more of that blood is pulled into your interstitial areas. Those blood vessels are vasodilated, making your blood pressure really low upon standing. So the problem is you might faint when you stand up. And this is definitely a common problem for older people because the blood vessels are less responsive and less elastic in getting that vasoconstriction to happen. So, what does cold do to our blood vessels? Vasoconstrict. So, take the same person, put them to sleep in a cold room. Those vessels will still dilate to an extent when you're laying down, but standing upright, you don't have nearly as bad a problem with orthostatic hypotension. So the cold will promote vasoconstriction. So when they stand, they shouldn't faint coming up from a cold room as opposed to a warm room. All right. Another thought for you. What does smoking do to blood pressure? What is in that cigarette? Nicotine. What does nicotine do to our vessels? Vasoconstrict. All right, so if you vasoconstrict, what does that do to your heart rate? Increase. And blood pressure?
Increase.
Both increase. Good. So smoking by itself is going to act as a vasoconstrictor. That's going to increase heart rate, increase blood pressure. Add to that alcohol. All right, this is going to go back into chapter 16 with ADH. What does alcohol do to ADH?
Inhibits it.
Good. Inhibits ADH. So instead of having ADH present, what happens to all the fluids that are passing through your kidneys?
Flushed.
Flushed out. So, if you lose a bunch of fluid, what does that do to your cardiac output?
Low blood pressure.
Yeah, lowers it. So you lower your cardiac output, that lowers your blood pressure, that lowers your heart rate. So look at the competition here. You've got nicotine that's ramping things up, and you've got alcohol that's pushing them down. So what an odd combination this is. You've got nicotine that vasoconstricts and increases blood pressure, while alcohol puts ADH to sleep and decreases blood pressure. So
That's a good combination.
great combination, absolutely.
Isn't that why alcohol makes when you drink you want a cigarette? You don't drink and smoke like that.
Yeah, somebody else on that one, yeah.
Okay.
But I hear that's a common desire to have them together, yeah. Maybe the nicotine increases your blood pressure, makes you feel a little more
I mean, if you
whatever.
don't smoke cigarettes, you don't really care about a cigarette. But if you have like 2 or 3 margaritas at the bar at Chili's or something, you will walk out of there full wanting a cigarette bad.
Interesting.
Something about it, I don't know.
And plus, we haven't even talked about respiratory system yet, but cigarettes rob you of your oxygen because carbon monoxide travels where the oxygen should travel. So then you've got another problem because the oxygen levels are low. So it just further compounds that problem. All right. My last thought for today is this one here on allergic reactions. We talked briefly in class last period about histamine. What does histamine do? Lowers your blood pressure. Histamine comes from one of our white blood cells, and it's a potent vasodilator. Vasodilation promotes what?
Low blood pressure.
Low blood pressure, yeah. In fact, histamine makes your capillaries leaky, so all that fluid that escapes into the surrounding cells and tissues does not come back in. Swelling, exactly. So that's how people who have severe allergic reaction have swollen respiratory, pipes. They have swelling in their body cells and tissues and itchy hives. The most concerning feature there is not the itchy hives, but the swelling in the respiratory. Yeah, it can shut off that breathing passageway. So, histamine reactions are related to vasodilation and a drop in blood pressure. Alright, so some of these might end up being essay questions on the test on Tuesday. So just something to kind of think about between now and then in terms of how would you address some of these questions if they do show up on your exam as an essay question. Hint, hint. Okay. Makes capillaries leaky, yeah. So all that fluid that leaks out, it's very hard to get it back in. Alright, what I thought I would do with you is go back and review our last concept from Tuesday's class, and that was capillary exchange, specifically talking about bulk flow of fluid. This little animation is on D2L, and it's a flash animation, like Dwayne pointed out, it's an older type of file. If you have trouble opening it, he's given you directions, and I posted those up there for you on D2L, but nonetheless, it is kind of an oddball, old-timey file to open. So I thought I'd share it with you here, so at least you have the opportunity to see that capillary exchange file that's on D2L. This little animation kind of encapsulates what we talked about in here during the last 20 or so minutes of class on Tuesday. So let me let this one play.
At the arterial end of the capillary, the net filtration pressure is equal to the net hydrostatic pressure minus the net osmotic pressure. The net filtration pressure is 13 millimeters of mercury. This causes fluid to move from the capillary into the interstitial fluid. At the venous end of the capillary, the net filtration pressure is equal to the net hydrostatic pressure minus the net osmotic pressure. The net filtration pressure is minus 7 millimeters of mercury. This causes fluid to move from the interstitial fluid into the capillary. Approximately 9/10 of the fluid that leaves the capillary at its arterial end re-enters the capillary at the venous end. About 1/10 of the fluid passes into the lymphatic capillaries and returns to the bloodstream via the lymphatic system.
Okay, so the values I had given you for NFP, which is net filtration pressure, I'd given you something like 10 on class Tuesday. They say 13 here, so it's approximately the same kind of value. The positive pressure is pushing that fluid out of the capillary. So at your arterial end, you've got two pressures to deal with. One of those pressures is hydrostatic pressure of the capillary. We call it HPC, and the more common name for hydrostatic pressure is what? Blood pressure, good. At the arterial end of the capillary, what was HPC or blood pressure? 35, good. So we're looking at 35 millimeters mercury of pressure at your arterial end. Hydrostatic pressure is always pushing fluids out. Okay? Also at the arterial end, we have a competing pressure. This is not hydrostatic pushing fluids, but rather osmotic pressure. Osmotic pressure is created by the presence of what? Solutes and proteins. Hydrostatic pushes, osmotic pressure pulls. So wherever you have the majority of your solutes and proteins, that creates a pull, and water always follows salt. So water is going to go to the area where you have the highest level of solutes and proteins. What was osmotic pressure at your arterial end?
26.
26, good. So thinking about the terms here, we've got 35 millimeters of mercury pressure pushing fluids out at your arterial end. You've got 26 pulling fluids back in. If we simply do the math, give or take 10 to 13, net filtration pressure is pushing those fluids out at the arterial end. So because hydrostatic pressure is a greater value, 35, than osmotic pressure, which is 26, the winning pressure is going to push those fluids out into the interstitial space. All we're talking about right now is fluid flow. We're not talking about gas exchange, nutrient exchange, waste products, anything of that sort. We're only talking about pressures that either push fluids out or pressures that pull fluids back in that capillary. Over the length of this capillary, that hydrostatic pressure is going to drop from 35 at the arterial end to what at the venous end? About 15, perhaps 17. So why does the hydrostatic pressure drop over the length of this capillary?
Resistance.
Part of it is resistance. Part of it is pushing the water where?
Out.
Out. Right. So as you continually push the fluids into the surrounding space, that capillary pressure, that HPC, is going to drop from approximately 35 at the arterial end down to about 15 or so at the venous end of this capillary. So here, vessel length is actually an important factor, because vessel length is one of those issues for peripheral resistance. So that's another reason that blood pressure tends to drop over the course of that vessel. Hydrostatic pressure drops. Osmotic pressure does not. Keep in mind, we're talking about maintaining osmotic pressure from arterial end to venous end. At your arterial end, osmotic pressure is the pull of fluids trying to come back into the capillary. 26 is the number we're dealing with. 26 is going to be pretty constant over the length of this capillary. So, by the time we reach the venous end, we have only 15 hydrostatic pushing out, but we've got 26 pressure osmotic pulling in. Who wins?
Is that a constant throughout the body?
It's the osmotic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much a constant.
I mean, that's just what it is.
That's just what it is.